Their father died when he and his sister were little. His mother told him to become a shaman because he had potential. The spirits would protect him. If he didn't choose this path, he would be in big trouble. She made him study the religious aspects of shamanism, poetry, magic, and even strange things unknown to him before. But then he already knew what he wanted out of life, and all these teachings didn't interest him at all. So he devoted all his time to scientific research. 10 years later, he became part of society. But he died after being hit by a car. It's hard to believe, but his mom was right. Trouble had caught up with him. And the most amazing thing was his rebirth. It turned out there was more to life than one. Everything his mom said turned out to be true. After death, he realized that some things are only learned through experience. So what was he doing now? The man placed his hand on the open book and said that the lesson was beginning. Today they will continue to create a magic circle. He works as a teacher at the Magic Academy. A series of events brought him here. It was snowing in the city. There were many people at the station. Conversations could be heard from everywhere. The controller wished the man a good journey. He was next in line. The controller greeted the man and asked him to show his ticket. The man held out his ticket, and the controller let him pass. Then the first man stepped into the train. Seat 403, fourth car, third compartment. He found his seat. In the compartment sat an elderly man reading a newspaper. He noticed the man and said hello to him. The man bowed politely in return. Smoke came out of the train's chimney, and the wheels started working. The train began to move. The men sat opposite each other. One was reading a newspaper, the other a book. The other broke away from the book and looked up at his companion's newspaper. The civil war in the kingdom of Utah was over. The princess faction had won. The man said that the war was finally over. The old man looked at the man angrily. He said that he too was wondering when it would all stop. Just recently, the princess faction was recruiting soldiers. It was good that the war didn't last long. The man stammered and apologized for not introducing himself. His name was Roger Selassie. His companion said he didn't have a last name. He was just Gerard. He assumed the man was of noble descent. Roger said he was a fallen nobleman. A fallen nobleman is someone who was once a nobleman, but did something that caused his title to be taken away. But despite that, fallen nobles can still use magic. Roger Selassie asked where the old man was headed. Gerard said that he was traveling to Lindenbrunn, the capital of the empire. The Exilian Empire is famous for advanced magical engineering, so there's definitely something to see there. The man said he was heading to Leatherwalk to join Theon's academy. The companion was surprised. He praised the man, saying that he was so young, he must be an outstanding expert. But Roger Selassie said that really, he was just lucky. Gerard said that many people want to be in Roger's shoes. He should be proud of himself. The man thanked the old man for his words, and returning to the topic of the war asked if the old man had heard any rumors about a man from the princess faction who had won a victory. It was said that he had no experience in magic or the highest rank of knighthood. It was a traveling mercenary named Machiavelli. Jared glanced at Roger unhappily. The man realized the old man wasn't particularly surprised. Jared had said it was nothing more than gossip. But it was true. After all, Machiavelli was someone who wandered the world in search of one thing. And that was the name Roger had used in a past life. The old man changed the subject and asked the man if he would take a class under him at Theon's academy. Roger answered in the affirmative. He would be in charge of the second-year students. Jared was surprised that he was starting right away as a second year. The man was much more capable than he thought. Roger was a little confused. The old man looked out the window fearfully. Part of the train exploded. The passengers began to shake. The companions began to assume that it was the engine that exploded, but that couldn't be, because it was protected by magic. The old man realized it was a trap. But the man didn't understand why it was a trap. Jared assumed that someone wanted to rob rich merchants or nobles. If they had set the explosion, then there was definitely a mage among them. The old man said they should hide or get off the train, and Roger said he would go first. He carefully looked out of the compartment, started to get out, and said there was no one in the fourth car. Jared asked if the other passengers were safe. The man said the compartments were protected by magic, to which the old man said that was no guarantee. It was dangerous to stay in the compartment if they were under the same magic spell whose protection had been broken. The explosion came from the third carriage. Then why aren't the robbers still here? The old man said that if he were them, he'd head for the first car, the first-class passengers. Jared suggested going out the back door. They'd just have to wait for security. The men were standing with their backs to the window and didn't see the robber fly into it. As soon as it flew in, knocking the men to the ground, Roger told Jared to stand behind him. The others said the robber looked lousy. He tried to attack the men with a knife, but Roger used magic and knocked the mugger back. The old man asked if the man had killed him, but the man said he just immobilized him for a while. He started to approach the robber to ask a few questions. Roger pointed his cane at him and asked why the robber had climbed into that wagon. The man only laughed. Roger then said he didn't authorize him to laugh. The robber called the man a dirty little man and said he would kill everyone. He unzipped his jacket, and underneath was dynamite. The timer showed 2 seconds. 1 second. Jared yelled at the man to hide. The dynamite exploded. Everything was covered in fire and smoke. The old man lay on the floor, covering his head with his hands. He raised his head and asked if Roger was okay. But when he looked around, he didn't find the man. A hole had formed in the wagon. The old man called out for the man once more, and then he began to pull off his skin, while saying that this suit was custom-made. He took off the mask. The man who emerged from beneath the suit was a complete replica of Roger. And why is he always involved in accidents? There's no particular reason why he chose the name Machiavelli. He just took the name of a famous person from his past life. He needed a complete personality change so that he wouldn't get into any dangerous trouble while he was traveling the world. Machiavelli's image was going to help him with that. It was a difficult day. He attracted unwanted attention even though he had to keep his identity a secret. Fortunately, the princess and her soldiers were enveloped in triumph, and he managed to hide when they lowered their defenses and took the train to Lindebrunn. But why does something always happen to him? A man threw his mask through a hole in the train. Rest in peace, Roger. To set up an ambush like that in broad daylight. The man didn't expect to set off a bomb. Normal robbers wouldn't do that. Only a psycho intent on killing everyone would do something like that. Perhaps the train itself, not the passengers, was the target. The controller approached the man. He wanted to make sure he was okay. He saw a hole in the car and didn't understand what had happened. The man said that the train was attacked by armed robbers. They seemed to be headed for the first car. It was best not to go in there. The controller said he should evacuate the passengers through the last car, and the man should leave too. But the checker didn't finish his sentence. The man grabbed the controller by the neck and menacingly asked him what he really thought his pathetic game would convince him. Robbers don't attack any passing train out of the blue. Not to mention a defense spell that goes down on its own. It's a hard trick that can't be accomplished without the help of someone who knows the mechanism. The controller panicked. Then he looked menacingly at the man, and even wanted to use the knife hidden in his sleeve. But the man had foreseen everything and grabbed the controller's hand earlier. He began to ask who they were, and why they were here. He realized that the controller would remain silent. So he picked him up, clasped his hands, and told him to go forward. The man heard some kind of sound. It knocked him out of his rut, and he let the controller go. But the man recognized the sound, so he ducked and several bullets pierced the controller's body. The man thought about when the controller had time to signal he had been following him, after all. So it was planned in advance. The door had been kicked in. The controller's body was on the floor, and the man was sitting behind him. The robbers were surprised that anyone was still alive. The man told them not to even dream of killing him. Then one of the robbers gave the order to finish him off. The man analyzed the situation and used magic to make the robbers unable to shoot. They were confused. Then they realized that the guy was a magician, and he was the one who disabled the weapons. The man continued to work his magic. But then something happened, and all the magic dissipated. The guy realized it was a suppressor. He didn't expect there to be a mage on this train. The man was surrounded on all sides. The robbers told him to surrender, and then they would give him a quick death. The man sensed that this robber was an unusual mage, maybe even a rank 4 like him, but he was unfamiliar with his face. About 10 minutes had passed since the explosion. It would take a long time to leave the mountains of Arret, and the man can't just stand around and wait for reinforcements. There's only one thing left to do. The man jumped through a hole in the train. The robbers were confused. One of them ordered the other to check it out. He looked through the hole and said he didn't see anyone. The robbers said the man had really jumped off the train. He thought they had scared him. But then a beam of energy flew into this monger's head, piercing him through. The other robbers shouted that the man was on the roof. They were in a panic. Was it possible to use flight magic while the train was moving? The man in charge shut the robbers up and ordered them to find him. The men said they couldn't use all their powers against him because he was a mage. It was then decided that a few men would stay here and the rest would go to the first carriage. They split up. A man ran across the roof of the train. The robbers heard this. They realized that the man was heading to the tail of the train. The ringleader ordered them to follow him. One of them started to open the door to the next car, but there was an explosion. It was a trap. They didn't realize how the man had time to make it so quickly. The ringleader thought that the man was different from the mages he had encountered. The efficiency and the result of his work is on a different level altogether. More like a hunter than a mage. Or maybe a mercenary. The robbers heard a sound. The leader was confused. The man was disconnecting the wagons to escape. Why didn't the leader realize this before? The man wasn't going to fight them. The car had disconnected. The train was now split in two. The ringleader was angry. They would not be able to leave the train and go in pursuit of him. The ringleader memorized the man's face. He would surely hunt him down and kill him. Suddenly, he felt something. It was a powerful magical energy. But from where? The ringleader turned his head and saw the man. He was using magic. But where did he come from? Was this another trap? The man directed a beam of energy at the robbers and blinded them. The ringleader ordered them to flee. The man stood alone in the wagon. Everyone else was defeated and lying on the floor. That was all. But one survived. His arm was torn off and his head burned. He was very weak on his feet. He called the man a bastard and asked why he would kill them. He began to press for pity, saying that the man had no conscience at all. The people he killed were ordinary patriots fighting for peace. The man said the robber was crazier than he thought. The man didn't understand him. The man asked if they tried to kill him first. And now he dares to accuse him? Let him say that to everyone who was no longer breathing. He was the one who said he would find the man and take his life. The man said the robber was pathetic. He wanted to let the robber go, but he now knew him by sight. And if he was going to get him, it was better to settle things now. Suddenly, the mugger was pierced by an icy beam. The man was surprised, for it was not he who used magic. A girl was coming from the other end of the carriage. She asked if the man was all right. She told him not to worry. They stood opposite each other, and between them lay the hollowed corpse of the robber. The girl said the knights of cold steel are already here. The robbers on the other side of the train realized that the knights were already here. They used the magic of flight in this weather. They started shooting, but one of the knights put up a defense field. After that he used magic and headed closer to the robbers. The knight blew magic all over the wagon, and afterward said that the second wagon was cleared. Another night relayed that the first carriage was also cleaned and the passengers were safe. Another night said that the situation on the train was completely under control. The girl praised her subordinates and told them to make sure the passengers made it to the next station. At the Leatherwalk station, voices were heard. A man was sitting in his carriage. The head of the Knights of Cold Steel entered his wagon and asked him how he was, and if the terrorists had injured him. The man replied that he was fine, he was just immersed in his thoughts. The girl was glad to hear that. She introduced herself, Veronica DeVille. The man was a little confused. A voice came from the hallway. The girl turned and asked what the gentleman wanted. He asked if the girl was the commander of the Knights of White Steel. She gave an affirmative answer. The man said he was Remless. He was an officer with the Lizarwa Police Department. He was aware of the attack on the train in the Arate Mountains. The girl said they eliminated all of the perpetrators. Remless thanked him for his hard work, but said that there was something strange in the report. Veronica did not understand what he was talking about. The officer said that the intruders took over the train too quickly. Even using magic power, they couldn't break the defenses so easily. The girl was surprised. The man went on to say that there was most likely someone aboard the train to help them. Veronica thought about it. The thought seemed like common sense to her, but it was only a guess. The officer said that they wouldn't detain the men, just identify them. The head of the Knights of White Steel agreed. She turned slightly to the man sitting in the compartment and said that the most important thing was to answer honestly and everything would be fine. Then the man realized he was in big trouble. There was nothing suspicious about Gerard's identity. He went through passport control as he should and boarded the train legally. It's his face that's the problem. He's definitely not 45. If he gets investigated, sooner or later his secret will be exposed. He'll be hanged, or if he's lucky, severely tortured. The street is full of police officers and knights. There's no escape. Besides, the lieutenant is merciless to criminals. Now she smilingly talks to him, but as soon as they begin to suspect him, the man was brought out of his thoughts by the officer's voice. He said it took him a while to get the passenger list. The man had nothing to worry about. He just needed to confirm his identity. Remless asked to see the ticket if he had one left. The controller handed him the ticket, seat 403. The officer looked at the sheet. Roger Selassie, age 25, and Gerard, a man in his early 40s. Remless looked over the sheet and asked where the other passenger was. The man replied that he had been hit by an explosion during the attack. It happened when they were passing through the Arate Mountains, and he had fallen off a cliff. The officer looked at the man incredulously. He was clearly nervous. Remless asked the man to stay where he was, but Veronica said he couldn't be a suspect since he was fighting terrorists when they arrived. Would a traitor behave like that? The officer was surprised by this information, but he put the puzzle together in his head. Then he apologized and referred to the man as Mr. Roger. The officer looked at the sheet and saw that he had been hired at Theon's Academy. The girl was shocked as well. They looked at him with surprise, and the boy was very embarrassed. But he coped with his emotions and, taking the briefcase, answered affirmatively that he was the new Professor Roger Selassie. They stood at the train station. The officer apologized again for the inconvenience, but the man said there was no need to apologize. He couldn't have gotten here without them. Remless said he would take Roger to the academy, but the man started to refuse and said he didn't have to do that. The officer insisted. He said the future of the Empire was in his hands. How could he not escort the man? Roger thought it would be best if the two of them left him alone. He said he had business to attend to, so he would not detain Remless and Veronica any longer. The officer relented. Roger then decided it was time to leave. He said he was glad to have met Veronica. She said it was mutual and maybe they would meet again. The man walked away. He exhaled. He could do it. He had done it. He mentally thanked the Real Roger for saving his life. The man was glad that the quality of the pictures left something to be desired. After all, it's hard to tell the difference between him and the real Roger from a snapshot. Now that the problem is solved, he's fine. Need to hide and create a new identity. A voice called out to the man. The man said he recognized him. He had seen Roger talking to the knight. The man introduced himself. His name was Wilford. He works at Theon's academy. He had heard about what had happened, and so he had come to meet Roger. Wilford was glad that the man wasn't hurt. He said he would take him to Theon. The man realized that there was no getting away from him. So he got into the carriage and drove off. He thought it was bad. The academy had ordered a man to meet him, who wasn't the most common employee. He has a trim body. Moreover, he didn't notice Wilford being around. Perhaps he was a knight. If the man ran away using a silly excuse, it would seem suspicious, and Wilford would follow. It would be best if he delayed his escape. Since Gerard had been presumed dead, he was nothing more than a ghost in this country. Which means that if the man disappears, no one will notice. Good thing he has an ironclad alibi now. And until then, he could live the life of Roger Selassie. While the man was thinking, they had already arrived in Theon. He was surprised to see the grounds. He couldn't believe it all belonged to the academy. Its holdings were larger than he had imagined. Wilford said he would escort the man to the rector, and he would take care of the luggage. The academy was huge both outside and inside. The man stood in the rector's office. He introduced himself. The girl sitting behind the desk said she was expecting him. Her name was Eliza Willow. She is the rector of Theon Academy. She asked if Roger was okay after the terrorist attack. He said he was fine. The night order had come to the rescue in time. The girl was glad to hear that, because if he had gotten hurt, the academy would have been affected too. The man didn't understand how the girl could talk about the possible negative consequences for them so openly. It just didn't fit in his head. But what bothered him more was the strange feeling that arose as soon as he entered. Maybe he was imagining it? He wondered if Madame Rector had met Roger before. Had she discovered him? The girl had said that they had finally met in person. She had complimented the man. Then he realized that they had never met before. The man thanked her for the compliment. And she said he would be popular with the students. Eliza handed Roger a sheet and said she would repeat again the information the man had received earlier. The worksheet showed the salary, and that the employment contract was for 2 years. Meals and accommodation were at the academy's expense. The man figured that this contract didn't really matter much anyway, if he was going to run away soon anyway. Roger saw a salary in the contract, 30 imperial gold coins a month. That's 30 million dinars in government currency. And 300 million won. The girl asked him how he liked the contract. The man said the terms were not bad. He thought to himself that it was a jackpot. Roger also thought that with such a salary, Theon's professors had a lot of responsibilities. Would he be able to hide his lack of knowledge as a teacher at Theon's academy, where everyone was a genius? But his job here was a done deal. It would be suspicious if he abruptly turned it down. He has no choice but to accept. Lying, bluffing, and reading people's moods is what he's good at. The man said he was fine with it, and was ready to sign the contract. He thought again about his present and past life experience and knowledge. He was quite sure that he could play the role of a professor. The girl rejoiced and extended her hand to him. He shook it. It was only 2 years. He should survive these 2 years, and he would be free. Roger sat in his room and thought about the fact that he had 3 weeks before the semester started. That should be enough time to prepare. He didn't think he'd be assigned a whole house. So he'd be a professor at the academy this time. After entering this world 27 years ago, he was reborn, retaining all his memories, but losing all his abilities. He couldn't rely on his parents, only on himself. He had been through a lot of hardships. But he never thought he'd become a professor. Technically, he got a fake job. Or rather, he got it without wanting it. Well, he needed a new identity. and Roger's situation played right into his hands. He's from a fallen noble family, hailing from the small kingdom of Kyoden. The only child in a family whose parents had passed away. The style of the letters he found are rather formal, which means he has no loved ones. Therefore, no one should reveal him. Disguises can't be found any better. The man now needs to deal with the lectures and find information on the academy. The first thing he decided to do was to study the terrain. Roger realized that he hadn't eaten anything at all. So he decided to postpone all business for tomorrow. Now he wanted to find a restaurant. 2 weeks later, he sat at a table, drank coffee, and studied the papers. All in all, he had time to gather the information he needed and prepare for classes. In the remaining week, it is necessary to learn how to apply new knowledge in practice. The man thought that the visitors were already arriving, so he would go home and prepare for the introductory course. Right behind him, a girl sat in a chair and said she was glad the man was safe. She was worried that something might happen to him. Roger went into a stupor. The girl asked why he hadn't been in touch for 2 whole weeks. The other members of the organization were worried about him too. The man just kept drinking coffee. He put the cup on the saucer and said he had to check something out. If he understood correctly, he was being followed. Roger's Celicite to be exact. The girl said the terrorist attack was a surprise. They didn't know the insurgents were planning an attack. The man said he wanted information about the academy. The girl misunderstood and said they were sending him information. He said he just needed to make sure the information was true. The girl sighed. The man got nervous and thought about what was even going on here. Now he should try not to arouse any suspicion. Roger asked if everything was taken care of. The girl answered positively. She said that they had dealt with the main figures of the academy they were targeting, as well as tracked down and eliminated the traitor of the organization. As far as the girl knew, the traitors were fed their own limbs, and the remains were thrown to the dogs. Wasn't that a fitting punishment? The man thought it was really bad. The first thing he should do is to calm down. The girl hastily apologized and said that she should have seen for herself first before reporting to him. He didn't understand what she was talking about, but asked what the reason for her appearance was. The girl said that he had been at this place for a month now, but still hadn't contacted them. The man menacingly asked why she decided to take the matter into her own hands. The girl started to stammer and apologize, but he interrupted her and ordered her to keep quiet. He said that she was attracting unnecessary attention with her appearance and getting on his nerves. The man asked if she wanted to be noticed. Then he thought she was overreacting to his words. She seemed to be afraid of Roger. The man said he was listening to her report now and asked how many people they had taken. The girl replied that 31 people from the Third Order and 7 from the Second Order had been successfully infiltrated, and other members of the First Order had already taken their positions according to the plan. The man said that was good, everything was as it should be, and if the report was over, it was time for them to disperse. The girl said that next time he should come to the place agreed in advance. He asked again menacingly if she was telling him what to do. How dare she give him orders? The man was already in his room. There were papers scattered around. A fallen nobleman, no family, the youngest mage of the 4th rank, so also Theon's professor? Why hadn't the man sensed something amiss before? Roger's personality seemed perfect. After all, it was deliberately designed to be so as not to arouse suspicion. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to infiltrate the academy. The letters the man had found were probably encrypted. He paced around the room and clutched his head. He had miscalculated. He couldn't believe he had gotten himself into this mess by his hasty actions. It looked like Roger had used the Kyoden language to encode the messages. The construction of the sentences immediately seemed odd, but the man didn't think it was about the First Order, whose job it was to infiltrate the academy and gain everyone's trust, and then periodically report back on progress. But that wasn't the only thing bothering him. The more he thinks about it, the less he believes it. How could the leader of a secret society die in a terrorist attack? I mean, he's one of the strongest members of the organization sent to spy on the academy. A man like that should have survived. There's no point in condemning a dead man. So, to add to the man's secrets, there's this whole thing between Theon's academy and the secret organization. Maybe it's a good thing they contacted him after all. According to the girl, the secret society consists of 4 orders: 0, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. The man may not know anything about the 0 order, but at least he knows of its existence. We need to find out who else the 1st order has sent. If this man knows Roger, there's a risk he'll be declassified. Right now, his first priority is not to get caught. His best option would be to use Theon to get rid of the secret orders. A secret organization wouldn't be able to stand up to a powerful academy, no matter how strong it was. The man sat at his desk thinking that he needed to get the information he needed in a way that neither side would guess it. This game of 2 fronts was giving him a splitting headache. He exhaled. He had 2 challenging years ahead of him. It was early morning. The sun was just rising over the horizon. Students were socializing in the hallway of Theon's academy. The auditorium was already starting to fill up. One of the students asked the others if they had heard the news, and continued, informing them that the subject of spell theory and visualization of the elements would be taught by a new professor. The girl was puzzled that the new professor would be lecturing for the 2nd year at once. The guy went on to say that the academy administration had no other choice, since the former professor had suddenly quit. And what could he do when a student embarrassed him in front of everyone by showing that she was more capable than him? Another girl with yellow hair whispered to Flora what the students were saying about her. The blue-haired girl didn't understand what she had done, and her friends said that all she had done was show the professor that his magical techniques left a lot to be desired. Flora hesitantly agreed. The students continued their discussion about the new professor and his progress. Dean of them said that this professor was a fallen nobleman and grades were nothing to worry about. Flora thought they were silly, for it was strange to draw conclusions about a person you hadn't even seen. The door to the classroom swung open and a man entered. He touched the book and introduced himself. He looked around the auditorium. The students were visibly nervous. The man said that the students didn't have a schedule yet, so he wanted to make a few announcements before they started the main course. He said he would be teaching them spells, but the structure of the lesson would be unfamiliar to them. They will not only be learning theory, but also developing practical skills. Also, the class will not be exclusively for sophomores. First-year students would have the opportunity to attend them as well. The students whispered. The man asked for silence and said that he understood that they were not happy about this arrangement, but let them not worry, the load would be the same. One of the female students wanted to know the reason for combining the courses. The man thought that somewhere he had already seen this girl, but he immediately replied that he considered it his teaching duty to let everyone get something useful out of the classes, regardless of their level of preparation. He also clarified that students should not wait for regular lessons. And the girl asked for more details. But the man did not want to reveal all the cards at once. He considered it boring, so he said goodbye to the students. But at the end, he added that if someone thinks that he can earn good grades without working hard, just because he is a new teacher, he should temper his ardor, because he will disappoint them. The man thought about not having students come to his classes. Still, it would be easier for him to teach as few students as possible. The sophomores' pride would be hurt if they allowed themselves to attend classes on par with the freshmen. Besides, who would want to learn from him if it was difficult? The man looked around the audience and said that was all for now, if there were any questions the students could ask. They were nervous, there were questions, but no one dared to ask them. Then the professor declared open the beginning of the semester, and walked out of the auditorium. He walked with a calm mind, for the students had no questions. He thought they would at least want to know something about him. It was all the better for him, but the answers prepared in advance were not needed. It dawned on him, had they kept silent on purpose? He should have been more friendly. Perhaps he had hurt their pride. As he walked past the students, he noticed the consternation and excitement on their faces. They were all looking at him, lined up on either side of the professor. He became alarmed. Suddenly some girl called out to him. She introduced herself. Her name was Selena, and she was also working her first day at the academy. The man inquired what the girl wanted. Selena asked him if he had lunch. They ended up on the street. The first to introduce himself was Brino. He was teaching how to summon golems. After him Matilda. She was in charge of spells and hallucinations from the curses and dispel magic section. Roger was the last to introduce himself. He was glad to make the acquaintance. He immediately realized that this was a gathering of the new professors of the academy to get to know each other better. He was complimented and thanked coldly. There was another faculty member standing to the side. He met Roger's gaze, but he hurriedly turned away. Matilda approached the man and whispered to him that it was Professor Chris Benamor. He is the first of them to join the academy. He is a nobleman, not like them commoners. Roger started to analyze, not counting him. Among the new professors, there is one nobleman and 3 of ignorant origin. Despite their different statuses, they are the best in their fields. In other words, there's a high probability that there's another member of the First Order among them. Just because he was the first to join the academy doesn't mean anything. And you can't take your colleague's word for it. While all the teachers were standing together, Chris turned around and expressed his displeasure. He said that they were all some commoners and a fallen nobleman. He also added that if anything, he wasn't with them. Each to his own. And he turned his attention specifically to Roger. He told him not to play the big shot. Matilda said that Chris's status didn't give him the right to look down on them. She asked Roger to ignore Chris Benamor. The man said it was fine, but since Chris was against their company, it was worth going without him. The faculty agreed with him. Now the man should be glad to have company at dinner. It was night, the moon peeking out from behind the clouds. The intercom in the room lit up. From it came a voice that asked if the man had heard of a new professor named Roger Selassie. The voice went on to say that he was the youngest mage of the 4th rank and also worked as a military officer. He was also involved in hunting cryptids. And in the magic tower, he is listed as an independent expert in magic. The voice asked if that was true. The girl sitting at the intercom was thinking about how she wasn't going to let Mr. First Order's first class get derailed. She was going to make sure that as many students as possible came to see him. The students listening to the message were enticed. For the morning, Roger walked down the hallway. Today was his first lecture. I wonder how many students decided to stay. After all, he had specifically warned that his classes would be difficult. The man thought that most would definitely not show up. And if they did, it would only be because the other classes would be packed. At best, there would be 30 people left, no more. When the professor entered the auditorium, he saw that all the seats were taken. His hopes were not realized. He didn't understand why there were so many. Were all 80 seats really taken? And why were there more freshmen than sophomores? Are they not at all afraid to attend classes with sophomores? The students noticed that the atmosphere changed a lot when the professor entered the classroom. Roger immediately thought of the girl in the cafe. She was the one who had set him up. Or he just underestimated the students. The academy had the best of the best from all over the continent. It looked like he'd awakened their competitive spirit. He was left with no choice. He introduced himself once more as he saw the new faces. The man decided to give his best. The student asked if he would teach them all 4 training profiles. Roger looked menacingly at the student and said that he had not yet authorized questions, but today he would be gracious. From this day forward, those who disrupt the class or question the professor's authority, he would deduct points. But students will have the opportunity to regain them, so don't let them relax. But since the question was asked, the man decided to answer it. He gave a positive answer. For training profiles, release, elemental magic, telekinesis, and strengthening. That's what they're called. Flora thought that usually, at most 2 of them are taught, but this new professor has taken a swing at 4. He's setting the bar high. The man decided to show something today that would pique the students' interest. It's a 3rd-level fire spell, the Quivering Flame. It is created on the basis of release, using heat, ignition, compression, expansion, dissipation, and acceleration. The man showed the students the 7-component technique. This technique is 3 times faster than current methods of performing this spell. Flora's friend asked her if the professor was going to speed up the process of creating the spell. The students thought it was impossible. The yellow-haired girl asked her friend if that was true. Flora said she wasn't sure, because the man had changed the basic structure of the spell. There are scrolls for spell storage, and there is also memory reverberation, but both have their limits. If the man used one of them, then Flora would be greatly disappointed in him. The professor decided to answer some questions from the students. A lot of students started shouting out their questions. Alex Silent from sophomore year asked how this technique could be 3 times faster than the ones they knew. The professor gave an immediate answer: this technique reduces the time it takes to create a spell. The next question was asked by Dahlia from first year. Does this mean that the professor changed the structure of an existing spell? Roger answered in the negative. If you remake the finished technique, then it will be a different spell. He would teach them how to speed up the process of creating a spell, keeping the technique in its original form. Flora turned to the man and said that this was impossible. She introduced herself and repeated her words. All the students sat in anticipation. Roger said that he was not authorized to explain anything, only to ask questions, but he would still listen to her. Then the girl began to say that in order to speed up the process of creating a spell using familiar techniques, one must constantly train and be a master at it. The girl didn't believe him. Then the professor said that geniuses could learn it, but they just didn't try. Magic stopped developing as it focused on history and customs. At the same time, science had progressed steadily, and now it threatened to overtake magic. He wasn't trying to say that science was a step above. It's just that magic has room to grow. That's why Flora's statement isn't true. If no one has tried to perfect the technique, then Roger will be the first. Flora was furious. She thought he was so proud of himself that he had lost all shame. The man said it was hard to explain with words alone, so he wanted to demonstrate. He asked the girl how long it took on average to create a quivering flame. She said it depended on the mage. A mage barely above the 3rd rank would do it in 10 seconds. A higher-ranked mage would do it in 5. That was the correct answer. But the man didn't think it was necessarily based on rank. Take the students, for example. Flora said it would take at least 5 seconds for them, although she could do it faster. The professor was impressed by the girl's confidence and asked her to come to the blackboard and show the whole example. Flora got up from her seat and headed to the blackboard. She started showing her technique and did it very quickly. The students were shocked at what they saw. For seconds, 78 milliseconds. Roger found it hard to believe that the girl was a sophomore in high school. He praised her performance, and the girl said it was nothing special. But the professor said it was still too slow. The girl panicked. The best time for a 3rd-ranked mage was 4.41 seconds, a little short. Flora said she would speed up if she practiced. But it was like the professor didn't hear her, and kept saying that 4.41 was not fast enough either. The students were shocked at how fast he was then. The man turned his attention to himself and began to demonstrate how to create a quivering flame. Flora watched and thought it was a completely different technique. But the professor was using the right technique. The students' mouths dropped open in amazement. They started to stand up and shout that the spell took less than a second. Flora thought that it wasn't the shivering flame technique. The man had completely changed its structure. The professor decided to repeat the spell again, for those who didn't see it. And he did it again. The students went into shock again. Now they had a change of heart. It took him 0.24 seconds to create the quivering flame. That's much faster than the official record. The spell might seem strange, because he used a different technique the first time. But nevertheless, it remained the same. In other words, he used one technique to create another. The students were still sitting in confusion. The professor went on to say that they should change the initial data and come up with an already known result. They create a kind of program, as if the magician's body was the equipment and the accumulation of magical power was the data. Then programs called techniques would activate the software, which is magic. And that's what the man calls source code. Flora had never heard of such magic. She didn't understand who this man was at all. Roger turned to the girl and asked if he had dispelled her doubts. The girl faded her gaze and answered positively. The girl interrupted the man's class without his permission, all because she took his words prejudicially. The girl frightenedly agreed. The man continued. He said she acted unnecessarily rude to him, so the man took away 10 points from the girl. The students wondered how come Flora was fined. The girl got angry and went to her seat. But the professor gave her back the 10 points because she showed the perfect technique of creating a quivering flame. He respects diligent students. Flora through her teeth muttered words of thanks. Everyone exhaled in relief. The girl turned back to her friend, and the latter asked how she was feeling. Flora said she was fine, thanking Cheryl for her concern. The yellow-haired girl smiled, and thought that Flora had let the situation go very quickly. But in truth, the girl was still angry with the professor. The man hung his coat on the coat rack and said that this was all just an introduction. Now it was time to start class. He would choose students who would listen to him carefully and teach them the source code. So they would have to work hard. All the students tensed up. The professor began to lead the class. One of the students was hovering in his thoughts. He was thinking that he had heard many stupid things about the professor and was afraid to go to his class, but his expectations were not fulfilled. Now this boy understood why Theon was the strongest academy. The time came to an end, and the class was over. The professor let the students go and gave them a homework assignment. The boys were excited about the class. All except one. He was not impressed with it. He said with arrogance that their enthusiasm only shows how shallow they are. That's why commoners don't belong here. The boy looked at the other student. He was a little confused. He didn't realize that the guy was addressing him. Then the blonde angrily asked how dare he look down on Baron Felio's eldest son. The student began to apologize. A blue-haired guy who was passing by asked if he was the baron whose estate was on the far border of the empire. The blonde smirked and asked if Theon was now accepting children. To which the blue-haired man said, better that than the stupid sons of the baron's family. Baron Felio's son got angry. He pulled out his wand and said they would answer for their words. The guy who insulted him was calm, he didn't care. This reaction put the blonde guy in a stupor. The blue-haired man started down the stairs. He said they would see what would happen if he attacked right here. The academy wouldn't turn a blind eye just because of the guy's status. Apparently, the blonde didn't bother to read the rules before enrolling. The other students were already watching the conflict. Someone was whispering, which made the blonde even more angry. He threatened the blue-haired man and left. Then the guy sitting at the table exhaled. He thanked the student for his help and introduced himself. His name was Aiden. Leo said he was just pissed off that this guy was boasting about his status. The brunette complimented the bare-haired man, but he didn't take it. Leo decided it was time to leave, and Aiden wanted to go with him, though he didn't even know where he was going. The brunette saw the alchemy textbook in the boy's hands and said he was going to the pair too. Leo didn't care at all. He told Aiden that he shouldn't be so obvious. The guy didn't get it. Then Leo explained that he was a redneck, a commoner, and couldn't learn magic properly. The guy wasn't upset by the statement, but he didn't know it was so obvious. He needed to find out how things were structured in Theon, especially regarding the sophomores, among whom there were those who had a strong position in society. Leo mentioned Flora Lumos, who was speaking in front of the class. She shouldn't be approached. It was rumored that the previous professor of spell theory and practice had quit because of her. The second girl the guy started talking about was a native of a noble family of the Exilian Empire, the third princess, Elendil van Exilian. A commoner like the boy would be in trouble if he did anything to hurt a person of royal blood. Aiden knew who Leo was talking about. He'd seen her at the lecture. And the third student, who heads the most famous second-year company of nobles, Frieden Valberg. The Valbergs are one of the three most noble ducal families. And to them, guys like that are just gnats, so they should stay away from him. And that jerk is a blonde guy who's in their company. Aiden sighed, because he'd already pissed the guy off. But it couldn't be helped. He asked if there was anyone else he needed to know about. Leo couldn't tell if Aiden was brave or just stupid. There were a few other students Leo wanted to talk about along the way. His companion offered lunch, but he declined. There was only one girl left in the auditorium. She was watching the departing guys with interest. The professor walked down the corridor. He thought the reaction of the students was better than he expected. Time in this world corresponds to the 19th century on Earth. Even considering the presence of magical power, science here is not as advanced as the 21st century in his world. Therefore, the man created the source code by combining magic and science. He really didn't think it would hit them so hard. When his teacher saw this development, he was brief, so the professor expected something similar from the students as well. The process of creating the spell was supposed to be fast and accurate, but it was complicated and limited to the third rank. A man can't teach them only the source code. More spells need to be prepared to keep him from being exposed. The man walked to the door. I think it was his office. He opened the door and saw a girl. She asked him to come in and asked him if he liked the office. She also added that each professor in the academy has a private space allotted to him. He could use that space at his discretion. The man was surprised and asked what brought the girl here. She responded by asking him why she was not allowed to be here. Roger was merely inquiring as to the reason for the visit. And as it happened, the girl had confused him by her appearance. She said she just wanted to check up on the new professor. Being the rector, she had to keep an eye on him. Eliza looked at him intently. The man averted his gaze, for as they looked into each other's eyes, he felt a tingling sensation in his body. The girl said that the man was quite calm. She expected him to be surprised. To which the professor said that his portion of surprises for today was overflowing. Running into a ghost at night would not be as surprising to him as seeing Eliza in his office. The rector had said that for the other professors her appearance had been sudden. Roger had been the last person she had stopped by. The man was angry, but he didn't show it. He didn't understand why she had left him for last. Perhaps she knew something? No matter how well the organization hid, to the academy's rector, suspicious details would not go unnoticed. What if she suspects him of something? The man thought it wasn't fair. Even though he was in charge of a secret organization, it wasn't like he was working for them. Eliza decided to keep the dialogue going and said that she had heard that the professor had invited freshmen to his lectures. He confirmed this and added that he doesn't divide students into courses. The girl did not accuse him of anything. On the contrary, she was in agreement with his teaching methods. There were some really strong guys among the newcomers. There were also students using unique magic. Roger reached for the papers. He had just received the list of groups, so he hadn't had time to familiarize himself with them yet. The rector said that his classes were being attended by the princess, so let him try to stay out of trouble. The girl didn't ask for special treatment from the princess, but it wouldn't be easy to handle the situation if something bad happened. The man became a little nervous. Eliza had high hopes for him. She congratulated the professor on the success of the first class and said she wouldn't worry anymore because the students had good impressions of the man. He reluctantly offered the girl tea, but she refused, saying that she had business to attend to. Eliza wished him a good job and left the office where the man was waiting for her. He inquired how everything had gone and whether Mr. Roger could be trusted. The rector didn't know. She usually watched those who aroused more suspicion, but she couldn't say anything for sure about Professor Roger. The man was surprised, but he was sure that since Eliza was on the case, everything would be resolved soon. The girl hoped so. She didn't think he wouldn't even flinch when he faced her enchanting gaze twice. The rector wondered if the man would give in to the gaze if the ball was a rank 4 mage. But the fact that the professor didn't react at all meant that he was holding on through sheer willpower. The girl found him interesting. And that terrorist attack on the train, knowing that a certain secret group was operating in Theon, she should be attentive to even the smallest details. The girl continued to ponder what if that incident was just a ruse, and the stranger took advantage of the reigning chaos to take the place of the real Roger. Eliza asked Wilford's opinion. He didn't know what to say himself, but he was sure that Roger was no ordinary young man. That's what his old gut told him. The rector had said it never failed him. The girl wasn't at all sure if Roger's words could be trusted, so she was going to watch him a little longer. The man sat in his office. He exhaled in relief when the door closed behind the girl. He was infuriated, for she was clearly questioning him. But it didn't matter. He hadn't done anything she could accuse him of. He would just go on about his business. The man picked up the list of students. He came across Flora among all of them, and thought that the Lumos family was the most influential noble family. He hoped he wouldn't get in trouble because of the recent events. The man thought that Flora shouldn't have taken his words to heart. After all, he had even given her extra points as a sign of reconciliation. The rector pointed out that the professor had gotten a lot of great students. From the freshman, who was vouched for by the magic tower, to the princess of the Exilian Empire. The man noticed another student. The rector said about him, "This guy is practicing a unique magic." The professor had seen him somewhere before. Maybe he would remember later. In any case, one should stay on guard. Judging by Eliza's burning gaze, she still doesn't trust him. Or is he better off sticking with a secret organization? That girl called it the First Order. She should have seen Roger's face when he boarded the train, which meant the change in appearance was no surprise to her. If the real Roger was an expert at disguise and infiltration, then the man must. But he interrupted that thought, for he knows how it would end if he were caught. And there was no guarantee that the secret organization would protect him. Right now, he must remain a professor, and do what he can. A knock on the door interrupted the man's musings. He got up, went out into the hallway, and saw one of the academy employees. He had come to give Roger the round schedule. Today it was his turn. The professor remembered that the contract had mentioned it. The academy employee said that was the end of it and left. The man thought that there was nothing complicated about it. There were quite a few students in the training hall. A blonde-haired girl was yelling at another girl. The second one was saying that she had the right to stay here, since this place was for everyone's use. She offered the girl to leave on her own if she was not satisfied with something. The blonde did not tolerate such rudeness in her direction. But the girl continued. She said that in Theon everyone is equal to each other, regardless of status or background. The blonde said that those were just words spoken so that commoners like her would not feel left out. Lady Dyneema's company mocked the girl. She realized that whatever she said, they would not listen to her. The blonde ordered the girl to beg for forgiveness for her behavior. But she just walked away. The company of guys started giggling and mocking her again. But Dyneema couldn't just let it go. She was angry that her words had been ignored. The blonde girl called out to the girl and swung her wand. Her friends got nervous, and a spell flew at the girl. She didn't have time to react, but the beam didn't reach her. At the last moment, someone deflected the attack. The blonde was furious at who dared to interfere in this showdown. An angry voice asked what they were doing here. Fighting in a hall meant for training? But it's not even a battle. The school year had just started, and they had already gotten into trouble. It was disrespectful to Theon Academy. The girls froze in panic. The professor used a flight spell and began to go down, while saying that he wanted to limit himself to a warning, but it was a one-sided attack. Daima began to justify herself, saying that it was necessary to protect her family's honor. The man was already on the ground at this point, and said that all of Theon's students were equal. No matter how noble her bloodline was, he simply could not turn a blind eye to it. The professor ordered the girl to follow him, but she got angry and called Roger a lowly fallen nobleman. The blonde's friend realized that it was unnecessary, but there was nothing more she could do. The man turned to the girl with a crazed look and asked what she had just said. Daima realized what she had said and now stood very scared. The professor moved closer to her. He asked her again if that was what she had called him. One of the female students called out to Professor Selena. The girl wanted to stop Roger, but he had already raised his hand. Everyone was startled, but the professor merely put his hand on the blonde's shoulder and said he did. The others were confused. Even Daima didn't realize what had happened. The professor reiterated that the girl was correct. He is a fallen nobleman. However, they are in Theon and he is the professor. It turns out that the girl is questioning Roger's authority. The blonde girl only lowered her eyes. The professor said that the girl just got in and it must be hard for her to get used to her new surroundings. He would let her go to this one, but of course she would receive disciplinary action for rude behavior towards her classmate. Roger turned to Rena and inquired if she was hurt. The girl was shaken, but healthy. The man decided to leave the students to Professor Selena and withdrew. Renee was shocked that Professor Roger knew her name and remembered that she went to his class. But after all, she was just an ordinary commoner, not standing out among the other students. The girl's mind flashed back to the professor's face and his words. She concluded that he wasn't as bad as he seemed. Now she felt she could trust him and follow his lead. Now she would study even better. It was evening. Roger was sitting on a bench. He was agonizing over the pain in his head. The man took out a vial of pills, drank a few and felt better. He didn't understand why all this commotion was happening now. He almost showed his weak side. The symptoms had shown up as soon as he entered the first training area. He could still control it then. But as it got worse, he was about to leave when that girl started yelling louder and louder, so he couldn't help but intervene. The man hoped he did a good job, but there must have been utter chaos on his face. He probably didn't look good. The professor looked at the empty bottle. It was the last one. He could last 5 days, but most likely he would have to use magic. Besides, going to the pharmacy with a prescription could be dangerous. The man should contact that guy as soon as possible. The next day, the professor had breakfast with the other professors. Selena talked about the werewolf. The students said they saw a dark figure sitting on the roof of a building in the city last night. Roger didn't believe it, but Selena was sure it was true. She said there were witnesses to his appearance on Theon's property. Of course, it could have been something else, but it was probably a werewolf. It's not unusual to encounter such an unusual phenomenon at a magical academy. There were even stories of Theon's 7 ghosts. The man was surprised, and the girl kept talking. The man said that she knows so many ghost stories. Selena got embarrassed and said that she wasn't specifically looking for information about the supernatural side of the academy. She just wanted to pick topics of discussion that would be interesting to the students, so she did a little research. She's not into that sort of thing, nothing like that. Roger thought that, actually, it was a compliment. He wanted to stop the girl, but she kept saying she wasn't into it. Matilda, who had been sitting quietly all this time, asked Roger if it was true that he had demonstrated an unusual technique in his first class. He had created something innovative by speeding up the process of creating a spell. Both girls were burning with admiration, and the man very coldly replied that it was true. The girls all couldn't stop marveling. They couldn't believe that such a spell existed. People at neighboring tables began to turn around at the girls' exclamations. Roger didn't like it. Matilda said that everyone wanted to know the secret of his magic. He took a bite of the food on his plate and chewed. Matilda asked if he was sure he could reveal the secret of such unique magic here. And Selena pointed out that the magic tower could have granted him a patent. But Roger wasn't interested in that. He really better not ask for any patents. If he let his guard down, he would easily get stabbed in the back. And before the magic tower contacted him, the other professors were already actively burning him with their gaze. The man noticed Chris Benamor and thought that a gaze like his would kill. It was getting late. Roger was standing outside. He wanted to walk around the neighborhood to look for the werewolf. But there was no point. The werewolf was right behind the man's back. He wanted to attack him, but he didn't succeed in doing so. The man tripped him, and he fell to the ground with a thud. The man said he was wondering where he was, and he was waiting to pull a stunt like that. The werewolf cursed and said it had been so long and the man couldn't even pretend to be surprised. He started to stand up and say that they hadn't seen for a long time, addressing the man, the older man. And Roger confirmed his words and addressed the man, Hans. The man said Hans was still causing trouble. What had he done this time? The werewolf said he didn't mean for it to happen. He didn't expect the dog that was sitting in the woman's arms a second ago to suddenly jump off and run at him. Roger said it was a pretty funny situation. And Hans got angry and said that a man wouldn't laugh like that if he were in his shoes. I think someone cursed him.